about that. And then finally, the file classification protection, which I mentioned, is mainly regulatory, but those come into play. If you're involved in GDPR, the one thing we say is probably this item probably moves up to here or here, because you probably have a need sooner than later to label content and be able to prove that you can label content. Identify your employees' personal data. So some of our goals, actually, we want to provide them less MFA. You may have none today, but by default, if you just turn on Microsoft's MFA solutions, they're going to be doing MFA all day long every time they go to sign in. We don't want that. One, your executives will tell you to turn it off, which defeats the purpose. And two, nobody will like you. So eventually Microsoft's moving to less passwords. That's also SSO. You don't have to VPN in to get access to things in the new world. Protection's always there. You can use your own devices. Some of the things that you will need to do for your end users is once you set up some of this, you'll need to teach them how to use DLP. Even by setting it up, you need to know what the different labels mean, as well as sensitive data training, same kind of thing. Where do I put things? I've given you sort of an order that we believe you should attack things in, but another great tool, make sure you're using, is the Microsoft Secure Score. If you put this into Google or Bing, you can find it very quickly. What it will do is you'll log in with your administrative ID, and it will look at your specific Office 365 tenant. Using the Microsoft Secure Score, you're looking at things for Windows 10, you're looking at things for Office 365, and you're looking at things for Azure. And it's going to give you a score, and it's going to say, here's how you're doing out of all the possible things you can do. If you get all the points you possibly can, you get 11,000 or 1,189 points right now. This number continually changes as they add new recommendations. So again, if you did 6 months ago, go back and check your secure score again. There may be new features or recommendations. Then what this will do is walk you through what all the things you need to do and point you to documentation on how to do it. So this is a really good tool to help you. It's also a really good tool to present to management to show them that you're making progress in securing the environment. Our score started out here. We're now here. We want to get here. There's also some comparisons with other companies in your industries and things like that if you've set up those settings. And so you can see how you're doing in comparison with others. All right, let's talk about, we only want to allow secure and what we call modern authentication versus legacy authentication, which is what we call basic authentication. So basic authentication is what you're used to every day, except for iOS. If you've set up ActiveSync on your phone with Exchange, so you use the native mail app, you're using basic authentication. You're submitting a username and a password every time the system asks you for credentials. So every time information flows and you need credentials, you're going to send a stored username and password across the system. The password can be cached in a browser. You can save it on the local workstation and it will just type it in for you. It's also vulnerable to man-in-the-middle attacks. If somebody's able to spoof between you and Microsoft, you'll send your name and password to them if they send you the right request. All of these are a problem. And with the Microsoft tools, we can't security trim things. We can't make decisions or force additional authentication if you're using basic authentication. It worked well behind a corporate firewall. Again, the walled garden, it doesn't work well now. And even some of the old things, POP3 and IMAP, if you have any of those, you're going to need to turn them off. There is no solution for POP3 or IMAP to use modern authentication. The standard is people need to switch to other tools. And I know that's a problem for some third-party vendors. But if you turn off POP3 and IMAP for 99.5% of your mailboxes, you're going to be a lot more secure than you are today. You may need to leave a few on, and you can do it per mailbox. So those are all options you can have. We'll talk more about Azure Conditional Access. It can't use basic auth, and as I talked about, ActiveSync uses it as well. Modern authentication uses a tool called OAuth. So it's actually when you go to authenticate with Office 365 things, Azure AD things, other cloud solutions, you're being presented with a token. So you go to Outlook, you go to SharePoint. If you have SSO established, you go to Salesforce for your company. You're directed over to Azure AD. Azure AD will ask for your username and password. If there's other controls we put in place, there may be additional things you need to do to log in. But once you log in, we present you with a token. You don't enter your name and password after that. You start passing your token to these different services, and that's what gives you the access. So we're getting away from storing your username and password and continually sending it across the network. The applications have to be written to support modern authentication. So let me just make sure everyone's muted here. There we go. So all of the Microsoft mobile applications, and we'll talk about what versions of the desktops are written to support modern authentication. There is a library if you're writing your own called ADAL, Active Directory Authentication Library. You can leverage it to add modern authentication to your custom applications. Many times you'll use PowerShell scripts to switch to modern authentication. Normally, you'll probably find most of you probably have basic authentication on for Exchange and you don't have MFA on today. You want to switch to that, right? Well, if you've got thousands of users, it's not really feasible from an end user perspective and a communications perspective to convert everybody over and get everybody set up correctly. So what you're going to do is use PowerShell scripts to take 200 people at a time. You're going to disable basic authentication for them and enable MFA. The thing about enabling MFA is that they're going to have to go through a process to either type in their phone number, get a text message, add the authenticator app to their phone. They're going to have to set it up. And so you're going to want to do that in a tiered fashion so help desk doesn't get overwhelmed, you don't get overwhelmed. Yes? I don't necessarily recommend either. Microsoft's is easier because it's already integrated into their platform. To use third party, you have to use ADFS. So using third party complicates the scenario, and there's extra claims rules and things that you have to add into it. Basically, you log into Azure AD, you get sent back to ADFS, and it does the MFA work, and then you get sent to the cloud. So from a simplicity standpoint, and if it meets your security requirements, I recommend switching to the Microsoft solution. But it doesn't always, and it depends on the security department. So a coworker I work with at one of my clients, Matt Rowland, the thing he says about Office 365 and Azure, which I'm stealing his line, that's why I'm quoting him, is that the transformation that has to happen going to 365 is not the hardest for the users. The users are already pretty much used to working with most of these tools. The transformation has to happen most within IT. IT has to change its mindset, how it does security, understanding the new solutions, et cetera, and that's where a lot of that work comes in. So, does that answer your question? Okay. And I forgot, I should mention over the phone, the question was, what about third-party MFA solutions? What was my suggestion for those? So I will mention the questions beforehand next time. And so modern authentication is Microsoft's way forward. It is the secure solution going forward. You won't see basic authentication work in apps at all anymore. Why did I say you need to look at it? You may have to do settings. So for SharePoint, OneDrive, it's on by default, but both for Exchange and Skype, it's still off by default. You have to go in and disable it in order for basic authentication to go away. So you actually have to take steps to do that. There's documentation available out there how to do that. And again, a lot of those, especially with Exchange and Skype, you'll do it from a PowerShell perspective so you can do it on a per user basis. So to support modern authentication, what do you need on the desktop? At a minimum, you need Office 2013. Modern authentication is not enabled by default on it, so you either have to have a registry setting made through a package, or the easiest way is to use a GPO. But remember, 2013 is out of support with Office 365 this year. So it's to your advantage to start moving to the one that has it enabled by default, which is 2016. Most of the mobile apps are enabled for modern authentication, including applications like Workday and Salesforce. They already use it. Again, so the other thing to remember is that with many of the things that Microsoft is doing, it's a whole new world. This isn't the Microsoft you knew 5 years ago. They follow open standards, they support open standards. Modern authentication is not a Microsoft thing. It's a standard OAuth token. It's a standard internet protocol for authentication. So other providers such as Workday and Salesforce implement it as well. Things that can't support it, Office 2010, native email clients, Android for one can't support it at all. So on Android, you're gonna have to force people to use Outlook. iOS, as long as you set up ActiveSync correctly, it can use OAuth. However, based off of other things we talk about, you'll probably still want people to switch over to Outlook. And anything that uses Exchange ActiveSync can't support it. Okay, multi-factor authentication. Lots of places can't use MFA if you just have Office 365. The MFA that comes with Office 365 is somewhat helpful, but it prompts you a lot and you don't have a lot of controller settings on it. We really usually, unless you're a really small shop, we don't recommend you use it. Most of what I'm talking about today, you'll at least want to have Azure AD Premium 1 licenses. Conditional Access needs it, MFA needs it. Many of the other settings just need a P1 license. You can get that independently. It comes with Enterprise Mobility Suite E3, Microsoft 365 E3 licenses. There's multiple ways to get it. With the E3s, you also get other security features as well, but I am gonna recommend the P1. Why do you need MFA? Because without it, you're susceptible to phishing attacks or stolen credentials. MFA keeps people from being able to log in from other locations, even though they know the password. Microsoft is improving their Authenticator app. It's rolling out now to tenants. Today, all the users get an approve and a disapprove button, but what happens is, even if they're not logging into 365, they tend to click approve, which is a problem because maybe it's somebody else. They're switching to a method where they'll provide you a number, and then you're presented with 3 numbers on your phone, and you have to choose the right number. Or you can report it as not correct. So they're moving away from the simple approve, disapprove function. They're also talking about third-party utilities. They're also adding support for third-party OAuth tokens. So you could use an RSA token, but you could use Microsoft MFA as the back-end system. One place besides security, one place a lot of people need that is that they have European employees. European employees, because of protection of personal data, some of them say, I don't want to use my phone. I don't want you to have my phone number. I don't want you to call me. I don't want you to text me. I don't want to use an Authenticator app. We have to have some solution for that, and those third-party tokens are the way to do it. Again, as you get into the P1 license, we can start doing things like basing it off of IP. So if you're on the internal network and you're using one of our internal IPs, we're never going to prompt you for MFA. So if you're working at your desk or with your laptop docked and you're on the network or the wireless network, we're not going to bother you. We're just going to whitelist you and let you in. But as soon as you get off the corporate network, things change and we start deciding if you need to do MFA. And if you, all in one step, globally enable MFA, it will disable Exchange ActiveSync because it turns off basic auth. So again, this goes back to that testing that I talk about. A lot of things when you're rolling them out, we have to do via PowerShell on a user-by-user basis because otherwise we break things. Okay. So that's the way we go about trusted identity. Well, actually, we'll get into conditional access in a bit. Only allow trusted devices. So we're all used to the idea that we have domain joined laptops or computers. They have all the corporate software on them. You have some way of identifying them, even if they VPN in or they connect through Citrix. Whatever solutions you're using, you can identify those solutions today. But what if you want to support BYOD? You know nothing about these devices. You don't know what state they're in, where they're coming from, who they are, any of those types of items. And how much control do you have over them? Even BYOD devices, we can have different levels of control on those devices, thus by allowing or disallowing certain things. One of the biggest things you're going to use is AAD registration. This is not signing up. This is not adding Intune to the device and completely managing it. This is not taking full control of the device. This is Azure AD. When you connect to your corporate system, we ask that you register, that we know who your device is, the IDs on it, and we're going to exchange certificates with you. We're going to give you a client certificate that both iOS and Android support. And then from this point forward, you're going to present this certificate to us to let us know that you've already registered with Azure AD. This allows us to say, as a corporate policy, you can't do 95% of what you want to do unless you register your device. If you're at a kiosk and you can't register it, we'll let you do a few things, right? But otherwise, we at least want you to register your device with us so that we know it's out there and that you're accessing it and those types of things. Talked about like only allowing syncing on devices that are joined to certain domains. We could even block OWA on personal devices if we wanted to. Let's say we wanted to force them to use Outlook because we can containerize things and do things like that. There's all sorts of things we can do with the concept of a trusted device. That's what registration is about, is by registering, you become trusted to us. So this is where we get into the multiple levels of how much do you want to join us. AAD registration is simply a certificate sharing. There's this concept going forward of Azure AD domain join. Within probably 5 to 7 years, we may is the big question, need Active Directory on premise. However, you'll have to be at when I say that, your file server is going to have to be at the latest file server version. We'll be technically capable of not having AD, right? The concept that Microsoft is moving to is that every corporate machine is going to be Azure AD domain joined. You're going to domain join with the cloud. Then when you go to access an on-premise corporate server, it's going to use your Azure AD OAuth token and the information about that to assign permissions to you on that file server. This is for the machines that you domain join today. All right. These are your corporate devices. And so what you're going to move toward is what's called Azure AD hybrid domain join. You're going to go ahead and register these devices with the cloud, and you're going to domain join them to your corporate network. You don't join your corporate network and do a domain join at the same time. It's one or the other. Over time, you'll get in a position where you'll want to start transitioning to AAD domain joining. There's some group policy functionality now. If you have complex environments, it's not anywhere ready for you yet. If you have simpler environments, you may be able to start using this and get away from corporate domain joining. So we've got registration, we've got hybrid domain join, we've got domain join by itself. And I talked about some of those. Right now, you could do a standard AD domain join managed by SCCM Configuration Manager. We could do an Azure AD hybrid join, which we're going to co-manage it. Let's say you're using SCCM on-prem and Intune in the cloud. Yes. Mm-hmm. Uh-huh. Okay, so let me repeat the question for those online. The question is, we've got a client who's moving to Microsoft 365 Business, SharePoint Online. You've got corporate domain joined machines today. You're trying to unjoin them from the domain and get them registered in the cloud. So first, I'm not usually unregistering them from the domain. Today, we're still leaving them registered with the domain or joined. We're going to register them with Azure AD. Windows 7 and 8, we're going to use the little package that you install. Windows 10, you can set it up natively. So in that situation, I would remain in the hybrid joined situation, where you're registered in the cloud, you're joined on premises. I don't have situations yet where I've seen that the cloud is fully ready for me to get off being domain joined because of the tools and things they're using. With it being a business customer, you might do some of that, but they also don't have all the license functionality that an E3 has as well. So I haven't worked with many business license customers, but I know that's one of the issues, is that there's a lot of difference between the functionality that I have between a business license and an E3 license. We talked about it. We can have it Azure AD registered. It can be managed by Intune. We'll talk about what that means. That doesn't mean fully taking over the device. That's the difference between MAM and MDM, and we'll get into that. And then the future for corporate devices is to move to this in the end, Azure AD joined, and then it will be managed by Intune. So everything you can do in Configuration Manager has to become available up in Intune, and they're working on it. And everything that you can do on-premise in AD has to move up to Azure AD in order to get to that final stage. But with all three of these solutions, we can start using the magic of conditional access. We'll talk a little bit more about that. For automatic device registration, Windows 10 and 2016, there's already ways built into the operating systems for you to register them with the cloud. For any of the legacy systems, you have to be federated with ADFS, but I think they actually fixed that in one of the recent Azure AD Connect setups, and I think you have to be at certain batch levels here. That's the other fun of the cloud. Everything changes every few weeks. So, but you need to do extra steps to get these other items registered. Again, I talked about you can only allow trusted devices. That's device-based conditional access. We can do device certificates. We can block devices if we need to. Somebody lost their phone, so we can go into the registered device and block it from working with us anymore. We know who the user and what device they're using, and they're linked together. It helps with desktop single sign-on. It helps with the registration for MFA, and it gives you much better reporting. And we'll talk about security graph a little bit later. So what kind of challenges are we trying to solve with trusted devices, trusted identity? We want to stop certain data from getting on untrusted PCs, stop data being uploaded to other places, and then all sorts of different clients we have to deal with. The differences that you natively have, I'm not going to go through the chart. I don't think that'll be helpful at this point, but this is a good chart that compares how are the ways you protect your corporate PCs today, and what are those ways that are lacking in the cloud? And the things we're talking about help solve these issues. But part of it is it also allows you to start showing that you're thinking about all of these different items in the cloud as well, and be able to start explaining that to security and to management. One of the places that it's still a little weak is the Citrix and VDI space. Because the user's remoting in, they're using technically a corporate PC, but most of them are non-persistent in a lot of those environments. So the problem with that is once it comes up and running, it wants to register with that user on it up to as a device in the cloud so that you can use your rules and everything else with that, right? Problem with that is users are jumping around to all sorts of workstations. So So basically you have to have maintenance scripts in place. There is no out-of-the-box solution. You run some PowerShell commands that if they log off, you automatically deregister that device as part of their log off on the VDI or the Citrix environment. You also can just run some maintenance scripts on the back end to look at when the machine was last talked to Azure AD. And if it's named certain things, then you're going to go ahead and deregister it automatically. So that's the one place you'll need to do a little bit of extra work for registration. We'll talk a little bit. I think we're getting into MDM. So MDM is mobile device management, and this is where you take Intune and you take full control of the device. In most cases, except if you're highly regulated and you really don't want to support BYOD without a lot of controls. Usually this is for corporate phones, corporate Android, corporate iOS, or corporate devices that you don't have on the network. And this allows you to do firewall encryption and antivirus checks, make sure it's malware free using software, and then you gain all of these other features by using MDM, as well as you can do things like turn off the camera, require a PIN, turn off the microphone, any of those other controls that you need to do and take control of the whole device. Again, this is really targeted for your corporate devices. It's a great listing of why you want to do MDM and the reasons to do it. We'll talk about MAM here in a little bit, but you get a little bit better check-in and more information. It does secure the device and protect it from being stolen it protects the whole device. And realize that mobile device management isn't a Microsoft thing again. Apple and Google invented it. Microsoft's just plugging into these capabilities that are already in iOS and Android. Again, a whole new Microsoft, if you don't know, I'll ask. What is any new Microsoft application? What's the first platform they test on? New client app. iOS. iOS is the very first thing they start testing their clients on. Not even their own platform anymore. Yes. The question was, does Intune integrate with DEP? And the answer is yes. And this is what the chart looks like when you start using MDM, especially with personal PCs, not just phones. And these are all the tools that you can bring to the table to meet the gaps that you had before. The life cycle of Intune is that the device will enroll. It will download a corporate application onto Windows, iOS, Android, Mac. This allows you to publish applications. You can start publishing internal applications through it if necessary. Some of your controls. You can make them sign terms and conditions. There are capabilities to bulk enroll devices that are Apple. So if you're using iPads in retail locations or on shop floors, those types of things, you can do bulk registration with this. And you can take away their email access if it doesn't get enrolled. Once you enroll, we're going to deploy certificates. We can set up email. We can set up your VPN and Wi-Fi settings. We can deploy security policies, install any required apps, and then set up app and data protection policies on the device. Again, this is all using native iOS and Android functionality. iOS is more robust in the things that it can support and protect from than Android is. And then you're going to manage and protect it. You can control it throughout its life cycle. And then when it's done, you can revoke access, perform selective wipes, and look for lost and stolen devices. All right, conditional access for Office 365. This does require the P1. This is one of the biggest reasons that I am encouraging you to get a P1 is conditional access. This is your strongest tool for security and for making choices. Conditional access, everything that's in play with it, it's your mobile devices or PCs of some sort. We're going to talk about Office 365, how it plays with Azure Active Directory, and how it plays with Intune. So what happens with conditional access? So a user sets up their phone, they set up Outlook even. You want them to be able to do this, and you tell them to install Outlook, they go to configure it, they go to connect to Office 365. Office 365 is going to ask Azure AD, is the device managed and is it compliant? So if you don't know for sure, Office 365 does not have its own directory. When I know you can go into Office 365 and modify users, you can modify groups, you can do a lot of that administration there, but it's really a front end for Azure AD. Every Office 365 tenant has an Azure AD tenant tied to it as well. And it is your key for authentication and access controls. So as soon as it connects, it's going to ask, is the device managed or compliant? And Azure Active Directory stores this state. It knows whether it's registered. And if you care about certain compliances, compliance is managed by Intune. And as you'll see a little later on this slide, Intune is talking with Azure Active Directory on a regular basis to let it know whether or not you're compliant. We return the state to 365. If it's based off of your rules with Azure Active Directory, we'll define if you're managed or compliant. If you're not compliant, you go to what's called a quarantine. And that you can push a device to limited access until whatever's wrong with it gets fixed. It's jailbroken. It has malware on it now. It's behind on its operating system updates. All those types of things Intune can analyze for you. I don't think you, so the question is, can create pop-ups to notify the user of what's wrong? So I haven't tested this one in a while, so I don't know current functionality. I don't think we can do pop-ups. There is a screen they can go to find out why they're not compliant within the operating system. So you may have to teach users to go check that screen if they're blocked for certain things. It's what the part of it is it's what the mobile platforms are offering us. We don't have a way, if they don't have it, a lot of times it's because we can't push that notification to the device in some way. Oh, okay. So it will send them a link to enroll the device in compliance steps that are needed. I'm not sure where that shows up, but there is something that will get them to a page that will help them out. Then they can connect to Intune and do whatever work. Intune's your tool for managing the devices. And to have compliance, you're going to need a license that supports Intune, right? But again, I'm trying to give you all the tools. If you don't have Intune, then the only thing you can return is the device managed? But having a managed device versus an unmanaged device is still better than not having anything today. Gives you more information, more control. But with this, we're trying to show you the full life cycle if you have everything. Intune will work with the device, get it compliant. Once it becomes client or compliant, we'll report that up to Azure AD for future use. And then email access can be granted. On the left is a general idea of who does what. Again, one of our good lists of what are all the reasons that you want to make sure you have trusted devices. Third one from the bottom, passwordless authentication, biometrics, Windows Hello, other solutions. Microsoft's goal is within the next 3 to 5 years, at least for their solutions, to completely eliminate passwords. They want to use other methods for authentication for you in most cases. Okay, all of this conversation was around MDM, mobile device management. Again, mostly for PCs that are corporate or mobile devices that are corporate. For devices that are BYOD, you're going to use a different solution, mobile application management. Again, this is built into the platforms, but this is at the application level. We can somewhat do some things to the phone, like require a few pins and doing other things. But what you're doing here is you're really setting app level settings. So as long as the application supports MAM, then you can do this. That's things like Word, PowerPoint, Excel, Outlook. We talked about it, Workforce, Salesforce, Workday, those types of solutions. If they support MAM, you can push down what a MAM policy is. What happens is, let's talk about Outlook. Let's say the user downloads Microsoft Outlook. It's a free download. They've got their Gmail and their Outlook.com account on there. Nothing corporate, right? So they got 2 accounts in there already. Then they decide you now offer the use of Outlook on their personal device for their business email, but you have a MAM policy in place. They go to log in, and what's going to happen is when the device hits your corporate system, it's going to receive a MAM policy, and that MAM policy says, number one, I want the data encrypted. So what's going to happen is it's now going on their device, going to physically separate the corporate data from the personal data within that application. They're going to encrypt it, keep it separated, and it's also going to control what you can do within the tool. So let's say that on certain devices, you don't want them to be able to have the ability to print, cut or paste, or take a screenshot within that application. You can then say within this app, and it's this kind of device, you can't do these things, but you can read your email. You can open up your Word documents in Word and edit them and save them back to the corporate network. But we don't want you getting out of this container. MAM is all about the container concept. And then because it's separated, when they leave the firm and they deregister their device, we will wipe, or we can push a wipe to those applications so that it wipes their corporate data off their device without wiping anything else on it, because it's per application. This is a solution most companies are using for BYOD. That's correct. It's only for that. In fact, you'll find when you first register it, it will say your company has policies. We're going to have to restart the app. And it restarts it to segment that data. And then it applies those settings, yes, only to the extent. So if you open up a Word document from your personal OneDrive, you can cut, copy, and paste, print, do all of those things. If you open up a Word document for your OneDrive from business account, you can't do any of those things. Yeah, this is the #1 solution, even for large enterprises. MAM is the biggest thing you're going to do for mobile devices most of the time, because most companies now support people using their own phone with the company equipment, but you have to implement MAM, which means you need an Intune license. Again, I'm trying to give you justification if you have to go for licenses too. But MAM is the only way for you to segment data on those devices. And MAM is not a Microsoft thing again. Remember, this is a standard by Apple and Google that they agreed on. Microsoft is just plugging into it, and so can other third parties. As you would expect, Windows 10, especially the latest builds, continues to have closer and closer integration with Microsoft products. We can do auto enrollment in Intune now. We can integrate with the CA and Enterprise Strong Authentication services much better. We can provide a very nice single sign-on environment if you're AD registered and you've set up Azure AD Connect correctly. And then it's much better for hybrid environments. So cloud, on-premise, and then other third-party applications. All right. Oh, this slide basically puts together everything that we talked about. At the lowest level, you're going to use things like conditional access to help protect you. I didn't talk about it, but one of the things conditional access can do is geofencing or be location based. So if you're a United States only company, you can say you can only log in from the United States. That gets rid of about 98% of your bad login requests because they're usually from other countries. And if you're a US company only, just get rid of them. And I didn't mention it while I'm thinking about it. All of these solutions, including conditional access, if you're doing ADFS on-prem, we can still integrate. You can authenticate on-prem with ADFS. Then when you get up to Azure AD, it will run through all the conditional access and take any additional steps with you it needs to. All right, so what this won't get rid of is if you have ADFS, you're still going to get bad login requests from all over the world because they're trying to hit against your ADFS server. It's only once you're successfully authenticated that it goes up to Azure AD, and then we can start doing geofencing. It's another one of the reasons, except if you have to have the only reason I recommend ADFS anymore is except if you have third-party MFA solutions and you're a large enterprise and you need to support it. Otherwise, I'm pretty much telling people to move away from it. It's not necessary anymore. We can control what applications you can get to. We talked about risk, and we can control if you're registered or not. With the idea with Intune is we can decide if you're compliant or not compliant and what access that gets you to company data. We can do PC management with it. As I talked about, most of your mobile devices will fall in here using MAM, and those are the benefits you get from it. And then you have the solution available to you to use MDM for corporate devices. What does Windows 10 and Intune provide you together? Selective wipe, all of these other items. I'm not gonna read a slide to you, but just to give you some idea of some of the benefits and the things you can look into. A lot of this requires setup, so. Okay, so we've talked about trusted identity and trusted devices. So let's talk about classifying, protecting, and limiting retention. Why are you going to want to do this? Why do we classify and protect? We want to identify and label sensitive data. Once we're all done with this, I've got a great slide which shows a 3-tier architecture for protecting data based off of identity, device, and classification. And we'll walk through that. That will help tie all of this together. Why I mention that here is point I want to make is you don't have to have a very complicated label system to have things better than they are today, especially in a lot of enterprises. I know I'm working with one customer today that their retention policies and therefore their classifications, if they want to implement, are based off of what country you're from. And there's a different retention schedule for every single country. Then within those retention schedules, you then have a subcategory. Is it a finance document? Is it a technical document? Is this document? Then under that, you have to choose what kind of financial document it is or what technical document it is. That's overkill. From my perspective, you can simplify that labeling design and still make it better. Retention's really complicated, I get that. It's regulation based, but especially from a protecting data standpoint, you can make it simpler, and that labels are how you do that. Labels also make it easier for you to track where different types of data are located. Once you do this, you can use the solutions from Microsoft to protect the data in transit and at rest on the device, and it helps, you can fully audit what things are in use, and you have these classifications can be used for e-discovery. So most of you probably heard of Microsoft's rights management system. It was a solution on-prem. It then moved to the cloud. It then got renamed. It became Azure Information Protection. And oh, by the way, they've changed it more for the good, but they're now calling it unified labeling. So what's happening is now you can now control all of your AIP and other things from the Security and Compliance Center in Office 365. If it's enabled for your tenant, you'll have a new tab called Sensitivity Labels. And that's where you can start tying AIP encryption and protection rules to it. So they'll still use AIP as the technology in the background, but hopefully will be a layer away from it now. Right now, you have to manage labels in 365 and AIP separately, and they're two different labels. This will bring the two together. This is just the tool that provides encryption. If you send it outside, you can make sure that people have to log in and you know who's accessing the document when. And you can also do things like this you can only access this document for 3 days, and then we're going to expire your access to that document. And we talked about that. And policy enforcement is what you can do with it. Can you download it? And all of it starts with classifying and labeling things. So all of those are tied together in a complete process now. That's labeling. That's unified labeling. It's Office 365 labels. We can now use AIP in the background for that. If people aren't labeling things proactively, we can also do cloud detection of data. So we can set up data loss prevention. We can look for certain types of sensitive types. There's 80 plus today. You can define your own. I can look for things like a European bank account number, a US credit card number, a US driver's license, your social security number, other countries' personal identifier numbers, things like that. I know we can identify health codes for diagnoses and treatments that are in documents, so we don't get that kind of information sent out of the firm. With Exchange, we do it through the transport rules. So once the person hits send, it flows into the Exchange system. As it's then analyzed, if something's wrong, it can be stopped. Notification sent to the user. Notification can be sent to administration, to the administrators, or compliance individuals, and we can stop content from going out there. SharePoint and OneDrive uses the search functionalities of SharePoint. So a user puts a social security number in a document and uploads it to their OneDrive. Or a SharePoint site where 10 people have access to it. Within a few minutes, search comes along, does a search on the document, DLP checks it, it finds a social security number. I can set it where it locks it down so that only the person who last modified it, the owner and the site collection owner, are the only people can access it. Then policy tips start showing up saying, hey, we locked this down for this reason. Either you can leave it this way, which is fine, and we're going to leave these permissions this way, or you need to remove the content. If they remove the content, the permissions are put back just the way they were before this all started, and it's freed up again. I think that's it. It's mainly that this one is good because it does give you policy tips. It can tell you the reasons we're wanting to block you, why you can't do things, what the issue is, and how to remediate it. Alerts can be sent out, and we can use different classifications from AIP to also do this. If you have an E5 license, which most of you probably don't because they're expensive, but a lot of you are probably within the next year or two going to get them because of the features in them. They have a lot of machine learning and getting labels in DLP automatically assigned to things. And that's a big thing for Microsoft. If you look from Microsoft's perspective on security, they will always talk to you about their benefits as if everyone has an E5. You have every single solution. We can automatically classify and label everything, and then it's just protected. That's not usually the case for most people. And so you have to think about, when you're reading the documentation, anytime you see automatic labeling, unless you have the E5, you have to discount that and think about how can I get my users to do it. From my regulation background, and working with users just in general. 3 is the ideal number of categories to have. Do not go beyond 6. If you go beyond 6, users will just start choosing the least restrictive one. They will stop reading through them. You have to keep it simple if you're going to use manual labeling. So the question is, if you have a mix of E3 and E5 users, how do you handle that difference? I'm going to give you a short answer because it's really complicated. Talk with some of your Microsoft tech specialists. There's an internal document that they have that talks about how to configure the services now between an E3 and an E5 and what segmentation you have to do. And it's different for each of the different services that you gain with E5. And you have to segment those users. Or if you're in a true-up situation, eventually someday Microsoft may come and start charging you extra E5s if you don't show that segmentation. Yeah, that's a question I had, and I finally, within the last 6 months, I came across a document that showed, here's Microsoft's official stance of segmenting E3 and E5. So I know Microsoft folks can help you with that. Okay, this is our 3-tiered model. We've got 3 different types of sensitivity types. We have our baseline that can either be a default one applied or nothing. We are going to have sensitive type and highly regulated. You're going to notice little dots along here. Those dots correspond to, in general, product keys. So if you have an E3 or above, you can use this column. The rest of these, and this is why I kind of encourage you to use Azure AD-P1, you'll notice most of these require a P1 or EMS, and then some of these, this one here, for a different type of policy requires an E5 or a P2. But if you notice, if you get the P1, you can gain a lot of this functionality above and beyond what you have with just an Office 365 E3. Okay, so that's why I'm usually encouraging P1s anymore. So let's walk through this. If I'm at the baseline, I can set up a conditional access policy that based off of my internal rules, if I rule that your risk is medium or high, I'm going to make you do MFA. It can be based off of location, health, other factors, right? If it's a sensitive document or a sensitive SharePoint site, we can the easiest way with SharePoint on this is we can now label a whole site. We can tell the customer, put all your sensitive documents in this SharePoint site and put your highly regulated stuff in this site. We will then apply the label to the documents as they get into there. And you don't have to do E5 automatic labeling that way. If it's sensitive, no matter what, we're going to make you do MFA. And then pretty much highly regulated, we're always going to require MFA. Even if you're, let's say, on the internal network, if you're hitting an highly sensitive site, we want you to do MFA before you get into it. We can then say that we're only, for all of this, we're going to require the approved apps, the ones that we support only to get to it. Like maybe we want you to use the SharePoint application. You can't use a browser to get to those SharePoint sites. So we can define those here. We can go ahead and block any client that doesn't support modern auth because we can't apply conditional access if you don't have modern auth. We're just going to block it. You want to get to this position that you're blocking it all the time. For standard baseline stuff, we just want you to be with however we require compliance. If you're going to get sensitive or highly regulated, we're going to want to do MDM. We want full control of that device. It either needs to be a corporate PC or a corporate mobile device in order to access sensitive or highly or regulated documentation. Again, you can define all of these, but I'm trying to help you piece together the idea between different protection levels and what that causes. If you have an E5, you can make users, this is really insane, but you have to change your password after you log into a highly regulated site. Every time you log into a highly regulated site, you'll type in your password, and then you have to change it in order to access the content. So the next time you go in, it's insane. But if it's really, really, really a sensitive site, with these identity protection policies, you can do that kind of thing. Again, this one's E5, so most of you can't do it anyway. So we can define what compliance has to be with your Intune devices, and we can make it worse if you're down here. And then we can define app protection policies. So we can say if it's a baseline document, sure, you can cut and paste. We'll let you. We don't care if you're cut and paste in between apps. But as soon as you open up a sensitive document or a highly regulated doc, we're turning all functionality off. You have to stay within the application to work with. Does that help? Does that help kind of? I like this chart because it really helps to tie the concepts of all of these things together. And this is kind of what you have to think through for your environment. At a minimum, you have to figure out what your baseline is and set this one up. And then as you mature the conversation with your business and IT communities, you can start to think about having higher levels of protection. All right. Establishing single sign-on, a lot of you today, so the idea, a lot of you use ADFS today to make people authenticate on premise. It provides a single checkpoint for security. You can still do conditional access inside of ADFS. It's very, very complex and very, very much a pain. Again, another reason I encourage people to move to Azure AD conditional access. But ADFS is a way a lot of people do single sign-on today. What this means is they federate with Azure AD, they federate with Salesforce, they federate with Workday, they federate with all these different locations. And then you have to log in through ADFS, and all the conditional access for those has to be managed in ADFS. What we can do in the future is you could still use ADFS if you want to, but you can also go here. To fully use all of this, you'd have to have an EMS license, but a P1 gets you some of it. We can now just have ADFS federate with Azure AD. We then have all other third-party services federate with your Azure AD tenant. Now they log into Azure AD once. We can use conditional access based off of the third-party cloud thing they're going to, and then provide them access to that third party. So maybe you have no email users except in the United States, but you have Workday users throughout the world. You can set up a Workday policy that says you can log in anywhere in the world to use Workday, but you have to be in the United States to use our other items. You can, yes. You can also you can limit the number of connections you have to ADFS. You could just have a Azure AD and maybe AWS if you want it independent, but everything else is managed through Azure AD. It also gives you all the logs and auditing and alerting, right? You can have all that login. Azure is already gathering all the logs for when this person logs into these applications. And so that's, at a minimum, I say move most of your federation connections up to Azure AD. Even if you still have security requirements that require ADFS, move everything else up besides Azure up into the cloud. Because you gain a lot more controls, especially if you have conditional access available. And you have monitoring and breach detection that way. So this is the basic picture, right? BYOD devices authenticate with AD. All your on-premise stuff also authenticates with Azure AD. You can get to cloud things like Office, Google, Box. Again, we can authenticate with Google. We can authenticate with Box. Microsoft plays friendly with everyone else. There's a subscription service now. They want to encourage you to use them. So they're going to support everybody they can. I think they're probably, I'm guessing now, but they're probably up to have 1,000 different applications that can authenticate with Azure AD. And if it's not in their directory, you can set up a custom connection. I've taken anything you can federate with ADFS, you can federate with Azure AD. And then now we can use that to go to other IDPs. So we can now suck in Twitter IDs and use them with Azure AD, those types of things. We can also start supporting having our partners and our customers have their ID inside of our own Azure AD and then give them access to our stuff. Say another company has Office 365 and they already have an Azure account, but they need access to your Salesforce. Instead of creating an account internally for them, you can create a B2B account in Azure AD and give that B2B account rights to your Salesforce. Yes, so you can control it through AD groups and say these people can get to Salesforce, and that just gets tied to your conditional access policy. All right, good. I'm gonna go a little bit faster, but we'll still be fine. Huge thing, if you have basic or above, make sure you're aware of the Azure application proxy. You install a little Windows service on any machine you want to. A lot of times I tell people just put it on your AD Connect server. It makes an outbound connection only with Azure and waits for requests. It waits for requests from Azure AD for your stuff to come into a queue, and then it pulls it down. So no inbound access required. Then you can add applications to Azure AD that are internal and give them a public URL. The public URL points them to a special URL at Azure AD. You hit it, it authenticates you with Azure AD. You apply conditional access, so you can even do geofencing for internal web applications now. And then what it does is say, oh, this user needs access. This guy immediately picks it up. It's a proxy server. It makes the request on behalf of the user to this web server. You can, if it's Kerberos, you can even have it integrate with AD and pass their credentials if you want to, or you can first do conditional access here and then make them, if it has its own sign-in system, then they might have to sign into this system here. But you can now wrap Azure AD conditional access around your internal web applications. And it comes with basic and above, free. Conditional access doesn't, but the BAT proxy does. Again, I'm encouraging the P1. P1 is usually the lowest level to be secure. It just is. For lots of your regulations, you have to be able to do breach reporting and monitoring. You can get a lot of Microsoft tools to do this. If you are not doing password hash sync to the cloud because of security, I would ask you to relook at it. Even if you're using Azure ADFS, I recommend syncing your passwords up to the cloud for 2 reasons. One, if you have a horrible event, you can revert back to managed logins and skip ADFS for a while and let them log into the cloud. Number 2, there is a leaked credentials report, and it uses those hashes to detect from black market user lists your user accounts that have been leaked and that password is out in public. Without the password hash sync, that leaked credentials report doesn't work. You have all sorts of reports. You can buy other tools like advanced threat protection or analytics and other things that can use this, but we have a myriad of reports we can do things with. If you're not familiar with Security Graph, you can write PowerShell scripts to query any of these components and get information about what's going on from a security perspective. If you need security reporting, you need to become familiar with Graph, Security Graph. There's also an Office Graph, but there's a security one as well. Microsoft is using it for their own monitoring as well. If you're not familiar with it, there's a suite that includes Azure Active Directory, Advanced Threat Analytics, and Information Protection, and Intune. It's called Enterprise Mobility Suite. It's just one of their bundles. Again, remember what to implement first. This is your general order that you want to go with. And then that puts Azure AD as your control plane. And that's it. I'll wrap up there, leave a couple minutes for any questions that anybody has. Hopefully this helped. I know it's a lot. My main goal was to give you this. You know, if you haven't done trusted identity, understand that first. Don't worry about devices. Don't worry about the cloud apps. Don't worry about the native apps. Don't worry about file classification. Turn off basic auth and get MFA going. Very first thing. because you'll protect the most users by doing that. MFA is the best way you can protect your environment. It's the first thing you should get on. Then figure out what you want to do with devices, and then you can move from there. I have cards up here if anybody wants my contact information. And I think that's it. So thank you for your time, unless anybody has questions. Yes. Yeah, I'll figure out with Becky and we'll get it out some way. Yes. Yeah, so the question was, will we share the slide deck? We recorded most of the presentation except for the first 5 minutes. That will be available on our YouTube channel, and we'll also have a link available to the presentation for those of you online. Okay, thank you all for your time. We'll take about 15 minutes, right, to switch over. For those online, just hang tight with us, and we'll be back in about 15 minutes. Thanks all.
Thanks, JD. VLOOKUP's cool. I don't know how it happened, but it did. They reinvested in things that are popular within Excel. How? They made an internal cache memory. So whenever you notice the common reference here in your cells D1 through F, 100,000, that is now cached in memory. You can do multi-million cell lookups in Excel, blazing speeds. Kind of show you a little bit. Presentation here. VLOOKUP, we have over 5 million cells here that we're referencing. Just going to do a quick VLOOKUP here on cats. Cats rule and dogs drool. Man, VLOOKUP is brutal. Over 5 million cells returned in an instant. Modern Excel is recognizing what is popular. It's going back and reinvesting those technologies for the modern user. Modern Excel is also artistic. A spreadsheet that you'd be proud of, that your boss would say, great job, that you would want to go home and print and put on your refrigerator, that you know you did a fantastic job. Well, it's kind of like that, right? It's still a spreadsheet at the end of the day. We still need to recognize maybe there are some limitations. But I do want to talk about the potential, though. Duke and Duke sales report. Stock images. They're everywhere. Let's go ahead and get rid of these, though, if you don't mind. And we're going to start leveraging iconography. Delete those. In our Insert tab here, our illustrations, we now have icons. So it'll feel a little bit more modern here, kind of with the iOS generation that we're kind of now living in. So we're going to do business. We can go and do add users, then we can do commerce, add some money. Looks nice and neat now. Everybody feels good about their report being in the modern era. But it doesn't stop there. There's also emoji support. I'm terrible at naming my spreadsheets, so I would much rather leverage Microsoft's emojis. You can hold the Windows key and press colon, or you can press period to pull up the emoji menu. From there, I can insert money, call this the money report, and just like that. Wow, your sheets. Oh, let me go back out. Here we go. Now your spreadsheets will support emojis. So maybe you could add a commerce, maybe you could add an employee one, kind of label it a little bit differently. A new fun thing, dynamic arrays. Arrays are hard in Excel. If you've ever been on a Skype call and you're trying to explain to someone, well, you don't hit enter at the very end, you hold control, then you hold shift, and then you hit enter, then you force that array. You're like, I have no idea what you're talking about. That is why I think Excel has done a fantastic job of making arrays finally accessible to all users. Jumping back in here to our dynamic arrays, we have our table. I'm going to go ahead and use the filter, which is a new dynamic array. So I'm going to reference our product revenue table. And I'm going to say include product revenue where the product is equal to paper. We returned an entire cell range. How does this feel familiar? Well, maybe if you're a SQL code counter, this would look like select date, product, revenue, from product to revenue, where product is equal to paper. It's like writing SQL now. Also, if you're familiar with the distinct function in SQL, they have a thing, I wish I would have called it distinct, but it's called unique. Our product revenue. We'll reference our products. And this is going to be by the row. Pencil, paper, notebook, sled. With dynamic arrays, though, comes errors. And my favorite new error type to kind of diagnose here. So we're going to do 7, 10, 15 here. We're going to create a random array now that is of 10 rows big and 10 columns. Still. we now have this spill error. Spill basically means that you're referencing a range that already has content. So within your dynamic arrays, something to kind of keep track of, especially if you're a developer or report builder, make sure you have enough cells to populate that information. All right, this feels like a lot of classic Excel. I'm worried about these machines and these scientists that are coming after me, coming for my job. So that's why I want to talk to you about Azure Machine Learning in Excel. Maybe you already have a scientist on staff. Maybe you don't have that aspiration to become that crazy data scientist. I have no idea what the term means, but I love it. So what I did was I leveraged the Excel Azure Machine Learning add-in. Going back here to our workbook, the AML. If you go to your Insert tab, there's add-ins. You get add-ins. Just type in Azure. You can pull in the Azure Machine Learning add-in. They've got two examples here for Titanic. I'm going to go and use one that I built out. We're going to do an add web service. So the data scientist will be able to just return you a URL and then also a key, so an API key. So go ahead and call out to the service. So I've got a sister rock and roll revenue predictor. My wife is a rock star, and I want to know at which club she plays at, who's going to pay her the most money to come and rock out. So my schema here is the venue, attendance, and door, and now I'm going to predict how much revenue they should generate from that performance. Go ahead and use some sample data here. She was played at club 3 again, maybe this time to 75 people, and they were to get paid $120. Let's say they also played at club 6, a new one, $30 to 30 people. $30 for 30 people. I'm going to go ahead and reference this prediction here. It does require cell ranges. You can't use table names. So that's kind of something to keep in mind. So I'm going to say range A7 through C14. Be my data range. And my output is going to be cell D7. Hit serve. Right there. Within Excel, you can call out to an Azure machine learning data model. Pull back results. We have data science in Excel. We need it. That's not the only thing, though. I would like to go ahead and point out this new icon. I would call it Machine Learning Junior. If you've not used this before, it is fun. It is fantastic. It is available in Power BI. They ported it over to Excel. It is the new thing called Ideas. If you have a data set, you can go ahead and use the Ideas function or a feature. Close out of this. Support Ideas. Here in our Home tab, on the far right-hand side, we're going to press Ideas. Then we'll go ahead and scan through your data to return back either rank, trend, outliers, or majority findings for that ad hoc, quick analysis of your information. If you see something you would like to insert into your report, easily just click Insert Chart. There you have it. So in terms of a quick business analyst solution, all within the click of a button. Location, 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 or how I learned to stop worrying and love stack symbols. Data types. Data types are a new feature where you can call out to Bing and you can create linked service. So you can return back recent results either on stock, so high, lows, closing, 52-week trends, or if you want to pull back demographic information from maybe a location or a zip code or a city, country, you can pull back population, unemployment rates, all very cool features here. So we're going to jump back into the Excel workbook and our data types. We have our stock indicators, MSFT, WWE, CAT, G, and Ford. Here in our data tab, we now have stocks. So press that button. Excellent. I'm going to go and create this too. Just a little bit easier for us. All right. For data types, click on this, you can now pull back stock indicator information such as who is the CEO, what is the high, what is the low, what is the last trade time. Or you can also click on the actual icon, pull back additional information here. Powered by Bing, this is not creating a live connection. They do provide the warning here, financial market information is provided as is. Don't use this as like your day trading thing, maybe just a nightly batch. Just take that into consideration. Zip codes, though, in terms of locations, we can use this on our data tab once again. We're going to go to geography. We're going to pull back information here. So 30009, Alpharetta, postal code. And if you want to add these additional fields here, we can add the city, description, name. Yep. It's just dynamic, rich links to information that's available on Bing. I think we're feeling pressure though. Right now, it's all about Power App, Power Suite, Power Query, Power Pivot, and now Power BI. So how does that connect with Excel? How does Excel live in this modern world where we're all transitioning to these new tools? Let's go and start with Power Query here if you don't mind. Excellent. So a real world example is you get that spreadsheet where it has 12 different tabs at the bottom, all of your data spread out, all the data cleansing, all the orchestration, all the transformations. Feels manual unless you're going to write some VBA. It's not feeling it. So I'm going to go to the data tab here. We're going to go to the get and transform section. I'm just going to do from other sources, blank query. And we're pulling all of the data from this existing spreadsheet. So I'm going to do an Excel current workbook. One line of code. Return every table and all the data spread across. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this step real quick. Content, we're going to expand this out so we can see our data and sales. We now have all the revenue spread throughout 2017. 1 through 12/31. No longer do we have to write VBA or keep up VBA solutions. We can start leveraging modern technology such as Power Query. Now, where's Power Query available? It's available in Power BI. It's available in Microsoft Flow. Now common data services with the whole schema and this automated learning, which is amazing. But you no longer have to spend hours and hours cleaning data. You can simply import it into Power Query, transform your information. So we can do a change type of date. We always accept the date type and change to currency. Then we can close and load this to our data model. So we create a connection only and then add this to our data model. So we now have the possibility to do data modeling in Excel. We're in 65 rows. I want more data. Everybody always tells me Excel can't handle that big data. Got a limit. Does anybody know what the limit count is in Excel? 1,048,576 rows. That's all people think Excel can ever do. Fortunately, that is not the case anymore. You can do a lot more when you're loading to the data model. I've got 3,625,480 rows. I've got spreadsheets out there with 10 million rows, 15 million. Do I think it's the big data solution? No, but it is a solution until you get to that larger platform. So let's jump into Power Pivot here. We can either go to Data Tools tab here on our data, or if you have the Power Pivot tab available here at the top, you manage. Now see two tables. This is from SQL Server Analysis Services, or if you're already maybe a Microsoft Access user, you'll feel very familiar just being able to drag and drop between the two files here to create connections. So I'm going to create a connection from the index here in items, drag it over to sales. We've now created a one-to-many connection here within Excel. It doesn't stop there. If we go to Data Tools, we also have this new language that's called DAX. Data Analysis Expression Language, or MDX, kind of its predecessor. So if we were to type in here equals sum, that feels familiar. And we can call it by the table's reference of sales table. We'll call it by the sales column sum. We can try to count. Or a little bit count. Right. So it already accepts quite a few Excel formulas. Sum, count, I'm sure we do average. We also have the distinct count, so distinct. New one. $3,237. So we do have some new, more robust functions that are available here within Power Pivot. Go ahead and close and put that. Excellent. And we can go ahead and create a pivot table here. Yep. Worksheets. Now I have two tables we can create a pivot table from. It's no longer that world where we have to mash everything together to create one pivot table, relational connections. So I'm going to do the item here for our rows. I'm going to drop in our sales, our functions here, so we're going to do total count. Our distinct dates for each. That's our sum. So now that you've been modeling data in Excel, how does this tie in with Power BI? Save this, open up our Power BI service. There, close this workbook, fill my resources. And I have no resources. Yeah. Get them back. So in the Power BI service, in the bottom left-hand corner, you can do a get data. You can import your data models into Power BI. You can do a local file, it's our Power BI model, upload that into our service. Import the Excel data or upload the Excel file.
It's still on the slide.
Yeah, we're
Oh.
seeing the slides on our screen.
Bring that over here.
That's all right.
Here we go. Do an import of the Power BI model. Pull. Yeah, your report here. So we have a Power BI model that's already existing in a report. You have a couple of different options. You can either go to the far right-hand side and you can do analyze in Excel. So if you download that, that'll go ahead and create an open document chart file that we see. Apologize here. Excel is awesome. That's a business. Go ahead and open the ODC file here in Excel. You'll now see that you have your data model. So not only can you upload your reports into Power BI to be used, you can also download them back from Power BI into Excel. So if you enjoy creating pivot tables yourself, you can certainly go out here and do it. Just make the brewery name, beverage, total score, easily able to see the top. There we go. I know it's been a lot to kind of consume. So I have one last feature that I want to talk to you about. I think is the single most important feature of Excel, past and present. That right there. One cell. The endless amount of potential problems that it can solve. Also, admittedly, that it can cause. Each sheet contains 1,048,576 rows, 16,384 columns. That's over 17.6 billion cells on a single sheet. 17.6 billion problems that can be solved. As much as Excel has changed over the years, it still remains the same. That is why I think the strange feeling of familiarity is Microsoft Excel and how it translates to the ecosystem of your Office products. Satya Nadella says, empowering every person or organization to do more. That is something that can be done with the application that already exists on your desktop right now. It really comes down to unlocking that true potential of how everything ties together. With that, I thank you. Is there any questions, suggestions, or if you think I'm crazy, I'll go ahead and open up the floor now.
Any licensing constraints on using the Azure machine learning or any of the external features?
No, I've been using that with, let's say, 2013, 2016, so it's just available. It's kind of like that third-party add-in, but supported by Microsoft. I don't see a lot of people using it just yet, but I think it's a fantastic resource, and if they spend a little bit more time on that, the fact that you have to reference the cell range as opposed to like maybe a table object, so now if your data is expanding or contracting, it could be more of an automated process, but still something you can kind of work around. Any other questions? Excel users, how are you guys using the modern experience? O365, anyone on it? Migrating to it? Loving it? Hating it?
Everybody's on.
I think for me, seeing that just in the past couple of years, Excel users are now being pushed into Power BI, and they're doing fantastic work in that space. I think being able to pull information down from the Power BI service back into Excel to empower people to do what they're comfortable with in terms of the analyzation or analyzing or also machine learning, that just ties them back and forth. If you've seen Power Query or are using that, it spans Power BI, it spans data flows, Microsoft Flow. If you invest in just one of these talents, it now spreads across 4 or 5 different products, all stemming here from Excel. Some of the features of Excel's kind of modern experience, Power Query, and also, I'll say Power BI, those came from Excel. Power BI was originally Power View. Its issue was compatibility. Same issue I think we all have. Somebody sent me a 2007 worksheet. It's not fun. Nobody wants to live in that world anymore. Come on, let's modernize this. But in their mind, the cell still looks the same. They haven't seen that light. It hasn't gone off for them just yet. Any other questions, comments, concerns for my general well-being? Awesome. So free swag. I've got either Self 4 or Power Query book. Can anybody name the 3 references from pop culture throughout this presentation today? Anybody, take a guess. Anything you saw?
Dr. Strangelove.
Yes. Anyone beat Dr. Strangelove? Anybody saw? Click. Dynamic duo. Batman, right? That's a nice Stanley. The kind of comics DC. And then the last one was Duke and Duke. Does anybody recognize that reference? Trading Places, the dollar bill. All right, sir, which book would you like? You got Dr. Strangelove.
Your call. Your pick.
My call.
Yeah.
I mean, I always love a classic.
Excel. Yes.
Why don't you enjoy the new one?
Thank you.
Welcome. Anybody else like Excel 4? Otherwise, it's coming back home with me. Well, I thank you all for your time today. If you have any questions, feel free to find me online. I've got some business cards. Yeah, go ahead. Excel book, you want the 4? I don't blame you. I've come through it.
Looks good behind you when you're on a video call.
Shitty desk. It works out very well.
SharePoint one.
Well, I thank you all for your time today. Please find me online. And enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks.
With the MTC stated design.
Done. Thank
One
you.
design that one is got a list, a library for document set, and a library for images. And the ability to.
Everybody too, don't forget Office 365 Saturday. Coming up.
And then you can set the data source. List
January 19th.
Yep, January 19th. So sign up now. We're also looking for speakers
The other
and
option is
sponsors.
that you just do a
Like your
library.
company to sponsor
One
or
library,
fancy yourself
two libraries
speaking.
will live.
Otherwise, just spread the word. The more people we get signed up,
The
the better.
imaging.
So thank you guys, and we will see you next month. hopefully.
Becky, did you talk about the Office 365 Saturday? That's all call for speakers, just local for that.
It's what?
Still open, call for speakers.
You
Yeah, that's what I
said
just
that?
said. Yeah, exactly. All right, thank you guys.
Yes. I'm not concerned.